What's this? Open only in the event you are curious. Talk about a written invitation. Welcome to Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. Fair warning, dear guests. This episode contains spoilers for the indie roguelike puzzler sensation Blueprints, in order to provide context for how this game can be leveraged for educational purposes. As no two guests will ever set foot in the same estate, even just finding out about the existence of certain rooms and items hidden within could be considered spoilers. With that said, please be mindful of how you discuss such details in the comments below. Best of luck, dear guests. May you find what you seek. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to explore. Let's see what's behind door number 1, shall we? From Hanabi to Among Us, our ongoing mission here is to explore how you can leverage games for learning. And today we're here to talk about a game that has been 8 years in the making that many players in 2025 are already considering a top contender for Game of the Year, Blueprints. Blueprints is a captivating, single-player, first-person puzzle adventure game with roguelite elements. Now, first-person adventure games are no strangers to this show. We've marched side by side with civil rights pioneers past and present in Minecraft. We've helped students with learning disabilities make breakthroughs in narrative writing with Portal 2, while testing the limits of how its level editor can support learning in algebra, geometry, probability and statistics, and even spatial intelligence. And we've wrestled with what does it mean to be free while wandering through the hallways of the mysterious workplace in the Stanley Parable. Much like the Stanley Parable, the barrier to entry to learning how to play Blueprints is relatively low. So for those of you who are relatively brand new to the idea of facilitating impactful learning experiences through the medium of video games, both make for intuitive launchpads towards that innovative practice. Mechanically speaking, Blueprints keeps things simple. You can walk around, and you can interact with certain items and objects that you encounter. Easy, right? No need for an extended tutorial in that one. The only tricky part to unlocking what this game has to offer is that the game is currently only available for Windows, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X or S. As we have discussed in the past, when it comes to leveraging video games in the classroom, the ideal situation, of course, would be to make it possible for students to have one-to-one access in order to experience the game firsthand at their own pace. But unless you and your students happen to be lucky to be in a Windows environment, chances are that will not be possible with Blueprints at this time. But because this game has become such a sensation, there is hope that we could see this game ported over to other platforms in the near future. Best case scenario, we'll eventually see Blueprints come to iOS and Android, so the game will be playable on iPads and certain types of Chromebooks. It took about 3 years for the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe to come to iOS, so you never know. We're just ahead of the game here on Engage, that's all. That's what we do here. And if you'd like to support production of this cutting-edge educational program, please consider backing us at patreon.com/engageshow. Thank you so much for sharing the show, and thank you for your continued support over the years. Considering that one-to-one access via Windows in order to get to Steam is unlikely for most in a K-12 education setting, our next best option is to bring in a platform into the classroom that can at least be hooked up to a reliable HD-capable display in order for you and your students to experience the game together. When you start playing Blueprints, you are treated to this beautifully animated cutscene where we learn that we are taking on the role of a young boy named Simon, the heir apparent to the positively staggering fortune of one Herbert Sinclair. But like any story with an eccentric rich uncle, there's a catch. Simon doesn't just get to pull up a dump truck and fill it up with cold hard cash. No. He has to earn his inheritance. And the only way to do that is to find the fabled Room 46 hidden somewhere inside his uncle's mansion. A task that sounds like something that should be a relative piece of cake, but old Grand Uncle Sinclair's mansion isn't some prefab house you could just order through the mail, which apparently is something you can do these days. In Grand Uncle Sinclair's mansion, the only constant is change. Every time you step foot into his mysterious manor, the layout of just about every single room shifts around completely. So be careful not to lose your car keys or let anything else super important fall out of your pockets, because good luck ever finding that again. This is where that game design term roguelite comes into play. One hallmark of the roguelite genre is procedural generation, a technique originally introduced in tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, to help the facilitator improvise the layout of landmarks and terrain that players encounter, often in the interest of bridging the gap between the most pivotal plot points of their epic adventure. And Blueprints follows the same principle. When the player steps foot into the mysterious manor atop Mount Holly for the first time, we are greeted by a note left behind by Simon's late uncle, explaining the terms of the quest for your inheritance. And next to that letter, you'll find a set of blueprints. And yes, that sound you hear is every single person who has played this game who reaches this exact moment and goes, "Oh, blueprints. I see what you did there." And what you'll see in those blueprints is your starting point right here in the entrance hall, as well as this helpful yellow cursor which indicates which way you are currently facing. And due directly north of the entrance hall is this other room curiously labeled as the antechamber. And as this is the only other point of interest that's clearly advertised from the get-go, it is heavily implied that figuring out how to make your way to that room will help lead you towards your ultimate goal. But is that really the best path forward? One of the most famous postulates in geometry is that the shortest distance between 2 points is a line. And when you learn that Simon can only venture so far each day before he gets tuckered out, it would stand to reason that heading north would be the quickest way to reach your goal. Except every time you attempt to open up an unlocked door, you will be asked to make a choice. Which one of these 3 rooms will appear on the other side? This is where that roguelite element of procedural generation comes into play. Apart from certain exceptions you may discover later, there is no way of knowing for certain which floor plans will become available for you to choose from at any given moment. And if you look closely, you will find that each floor plan features a different amount of doorways that all potentially face in all sorts of different directions, and sometimes they don't even have any doorways at all. This presents us with our first major challenge of blueprints, figuring out how to get to where we want to be. But oh my friends, that's just the beginning. Part of what makes blueprints so special is that each and every room is a brilliant exercise in environmental storytelling. As you wander through the halls of Mount Holly, you may not be able to resist stepping into the shoes of an archaeologist or anthropologist when scouring each space for clues and items that may help lead you in the right direction. In fact, this is perfect for English language arts, social studies, social sciences, and art educators out there who are seeking to test their students' powers of observation and analytical thinking skills. Whether you experience blueprints together collectively as a whole class, or if you're able to find a way for students to experience the game in small groups, challenge your students to ask questions about what they observe in each and every space they encounter. What artistic techniques are used to draw your focus towards certain elements of that space? What do you think the space has been used for? And what does each space tell you about the people who live there, work there, or perhaps were just passing through? And after setting the stage with that analytical exercise, challenge your students to design a room that would fit right in seamlessly with the aesthetic of the mysterious manor and the stories it has to share. This is a class project idea I like to call If These Walls Could Talk, and it comes in 3 parts. Part 1, illustrate a 2D or 3D model of the new room showcasing its form and function. Part 2, write a message in the voice of a blueprint's character that the player could discover if they looked around hard enough. And Part 3, present a cogent, persuasive argument that defends the visual and narrative choices that you have made. And in ideal circumstances, in an art, creative writing, or game design class, a project like this would then serve as a stepping stone towards a more ambitious, long-term project where students could pair up, take on the roles of art director and narrative designer, and have the opportunity to apply what they have learned about environmental storytelling to develop an original creative production, be that an animated short film, or a game of their own. And speaking of narrative designers, English language arts classes typically focus most on strictly linear storytelling because that's how most forms of media work, including this very video that you're watching right now. Conventionally, when a storyteller writes a novel or makes a movie, they are in full control of how the audience experiences the story that they have to tell, including dictating exactly what perspective the story is told from and in what order the events of the story take place. The role of the audience is simply to be the passive consumer who's along for the ride, but that's not how dynamic interactive experiences like games work. When a storyteller creates a game, they cede some of that control over the story to grant the audience some degree of agency to determine how the story will unfold. And when you combine that agency with roguelite structure, that's a whole nother intricate puzzle to unravel. Every time the player attempts to open up a door, they'll be presented with 3 different options for what room could possibly appear on the other side of that door. And because there is an element of randomness at play here, there is no way to guarantee that every person who plays blueprints will see every single option that could appear at any given moment in the game. I personally have made over 40 runs through the Sinclair estate, and I'm still making all kinds of new discoveries, and I'm not just talking about new rooms and items or clues that help me solve the game's puzzles. I'm talking about unraveling the surprisingly deep lore about Simon and his family. But how does one tell a cohesive story when you create an interactive environment where players might not even find all of its locations? And how does one tell a cohesive story when the order in which one player might pick up the breadcrumbs of the plot will be completely different from how another player makes their discoveries? There's just enormous potential here for your students to explore how this game addresses those narrative design challenges and learn how to shape their own unique approaches to storytelling. Now, because no two players will experience blueprints in exactly the same way due to that roguelite element of randomness, your students will experience the practically irresistible temptation to share what they have found on their own journeys through the Sinclair estate. This situation presents you with a phenomenal opportunity to issue a high-level communications challenge to your students. Is it possible to share what your experience has been like playing this game without spoiling the joy of discovery for others? Take a moment before you introduce blueprints to connect with your students about spoiler culture here. We've all experienced a certain degree of FOMO at some point when a hot new release is trending and everybody's talking about it because we're social creatures. We want to feel included in that excitement, but we also recognize that the joy of discovery is not really as sweet when delivered secondhand. So make playing blueprints a social experiment. Can anyone in your class keep a secret? Can anyone manage to share their excitement and their insights without giving anything away? Can anyone resist the temptation to just rush to the internet for all of the answers? This too is all part of the learning experience. Blueprints makes for a terrific Trojan horse for cultivating curiosity while practicing patience and discretion, all fundamental building blocks for not just critical thinking skills, but community building skills, not to mention practical marketing strategy. And what better way is there to build intrigue about a story than by leaving just enough breadcrumbs for your audience to make them hungry for more? Of course, if you're anything like young Simon here, you didn't come all the way to Mount Holly with rich narrative world building at the top of your mind. You came here to solve a mystery. This brings us back to how blueprints can be leveraged to test your students' powers of observation and, crucially, their ability to make connections and apply deductive reasoning. And speaking of deductive reasoning, if we're here to search for a room 46, then surely that must mean there are at least 45 other rooms to comb through, and that is a lot of ground to cover. Fortunately, the good news is that blueprints is not a race. You could take all the time you want to pore over every little detail in every room, but our stamina is limited. It's almost as if the game is saying, every room you make, and every step you take, Simon's feet will ache, oh make no mistake, I'll be watching you. This reflects another hallmark of the roguelite genre, resource management. You may have noticed that the game is keeping track of footsteps over here in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Thankfully, this does not reflect every step you take, just each time you cross the threshold to get from one specific area into the next. Talk about a perfect metaphor for study skills. Analyzing information in the interest of developing solutions to complex problems can be exhausting. And even if you were given all the time in the world to work with, like Simon here, if you don't know how to approach organizing information in a way that makes sense to you, all you're going to succeed in doing is burning yourself out. Now, it's easy to assume that by the time students make it to middle or high school that they've figured all this stuff out. But unless you happen to teach in a school or district that consistently actively prioritizes giving students the time to reflect on how their own brains work, and they value that just as much as meeting academic grade level benchmarks, it is never safe to assume that your students have been exposed to a healthy variety of information organization strategies, let alone be actively encouraged to give different strategies an honest try in order to figure out what works best for them. As one example, I have had many students over the years experience a great deal of frustration with taking notes by hand. However, when I would ask them to explain their observations and analysis on a given topic to me verbally, they were able to do so and recap information and articulate thoughtful insights without any hesitation or stress. So I would suggest to those students that they give dictating their notes verbally using a voice memo app a try, and to please use headphones when listening to playback of their notes during class. Playing a game like Blueprints presents an organic opportunity for students to have a natural incentive to practice sifting through complex information in order to determine what is most relevant. Our main objective is to help Simon locate room 46, but it doesn't take long at all for all sorts of different curiosities to emerge, so it makes it difficult to keep your eye on that singular prize, and so students will also need to experiment with all sorts of different techniques for how to track and manage competing priorities.
Young man, do you heretofore proclaim that playing this game cultivates note-taking and project management skills within a timely manner?
Yeah, Uncle Sinclair, that's correct. Aren't you
Deceased. I am confident that any heir worthy of the Sinclair legacy should have no trouble finding that out.
Speaking of managing complex tasks in a timely manner, please be aware of the fact that Blueprints unfortunately does not allow the player to save their current location in the Sinclair estate in the event that one needs to stop playing and come back to the game at a later date and time. The idea of challenging a player to make it as far as they possibly can through the experience on a single playthrough is arguably the most defining characteristic that distinguishes roguelites from other genres of gaming. And Blueprints is no exception, as it is possible to locate, unlock, and enter room 46 on just one run. But unless your school operates under block scheduling, the odds of your students completing that one-way trip through the Sinclair estate in its current form according to the way that they shaped it during that particular playthrough within the time constraint of a single class period are slim to none. As soon as Simon runs out of footsteps, or as soon as the player pauses the game and chooses to call it a day, your journey through the Sinclair estate as you know it will come to an end. And when the new day dawns, it will be up to you to reshape the estate. Whether you are playing Blueprints together as a whole class, or you're having students experience the game firsthand in small groups, it may feel discouraging to have to cut a particularly productive playthrough short when faced with real-world time constraints. But even so, for our purposes with leveraging this game for learning, this is not a deal breaker as long as you plan accordingly. At the end of the day, we may not all be as lucky as Simon and have eccentric rich uncles that posthumously lead us on elaborate quests in search of great fortune, but we all do have our own room 46 that we are searching for in life. And when your students do need to internalize and synthesize complex information in order to figure out how to get to what they are actually invested in getting to, your students will be thankful for the opportunities that you have provided them with in order to sharpen the skills that help them carve their own path forward. That's gonna do it for us on this episode of Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. Our ongoing mission here is to help make the practice of leveraging games for learning more accessible to educators everywhere. And you can help by sharing this episode, smashing that subscribe button, and backing production of this fine educational program at patreon.com/engageshow. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for all of your continued support.